Okay, so the first one I'm going to be talking about was actually horse-powered. That's how far we go back. It was called the Pioneer Omnibus Street Line. It's a good name. It's a good, powerful name.
Or in other words, the POS.
Yeah, you have a problem with that? This was led by a gentleman named Charles Dupuy, I believe his name is. Dupuy. I don't know how to say that.
Dupuy.
I'm going to say Dupuy. I'm going to add, for some reason, if I can't pronounce it, I go French. This line was, as I said, horse-powered and trackless. There was no track at the time. So essentially, they were covered wagons pulled by horses, but they were for the public. They were sort of like a horse-powered taxi that had a regular schedule and a set route. They took people from the plaza, which is now Avera Street, to a place called Washington Gardens, which is on Washington near Maine, I believe. And it was a beer garden. So it was a trolley that took people to a bar. Washington Gardens also went by the name Chutes Park, and it was a small amusement park like the ones that was offered at the amusement piers at Venice Beach. Chutes Park had a merry-go-round, a 4,000-seat theater, and a baseball park that seated 10,000. The main attraction was the Shoot the Chutes ride, which was a ride.
Why does that sound familiar?
That was a ride at the Ocean Park Pier.
Oh,
remember? It was a long slide that led to a pool of water, and the kid fell off and died. Same ride.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Maybe if we move it downtown, people will forget.
Yeah, tragedy only lasts for like 20 miles.
Tragedy plus distance equals a whole new amusement park.
Money, 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 money. Chutes Park.
Which is the original motto of Los Angeles.
We have it on a flag somewhere. Get that off of there.
Take it down.
Take it down. Start over. Chutes Park was destroyed by a fire in 1887.
Can't escape the flames.
Fire purifies all. Chutes Park was eventually bought the same year after it was destroyed by a man named David Waldron. Another two guys, Hellman and John Downey. The Pioneer Omnibus Street Line closes in 1875 due to the poor street conditions of the roads. They weren't paved at the time, and it was really hard for a horse to carry a wagon full of people on a road that was unpaved.
That's not my problem.
Stupid horse.
Yeah. Get a stronger horse.
Could you get like a buffalo or something? Which is the strongest horse that a man will. So it closes down, 2 years into operation, but it sets into motion not only the transport system in Los Angeles, which was inevitable, but also the use of downtown as a central hub of the rail system in the LA. Particularly, I think for a couple decades, Historic Plaza was like the hub of the city. Of all the rails were sort of coming up from around that general area. So after that, in 1874, we got the Spring and West 6th Street Railroad. It was also horse-powered, but the horse-powered wagons moved on a track, on a rail. So that was the first rail system in LA.
Were the horses' feet in the track?
They walked within the track, and then
Were these mechanical horses?
Yeah.
Was this a carousel? A giant carousel?
Yeah, it moved like 6 miles.
In a circle?
6 miles in a circle.
It had a diameter. Let's just put it that way.
The Pioneer Omnibus was like a really small stagecoach that could fit two, and this was not only on... Very romantic. But candles would set all them on fire. Fire purifies all. The Spring and West 6th Street Railroad not only moved on a track, but it was also like a trolley. So this horse or two horses would pull a trolley along. So it was the first railway.
Okay.
With strong
What
horses.
if the horses went to the right when it wasn't supposed to?
It probably stayed on the
biggest disaster in Los Angeles history.
The first pileup is actually the next episode. So no trigger warning.
Trigger's the name of the horse.
Right, this was established by a gentleman, Robert Whitney, who was not only a judge, he was a real estate promoter, which we're going to see eventually more and more. A lot of real estate men.
Mm-hmm. Again, conflict of interest, I feel like.
Yeah, a lot of hands in the pot. The person who sold him the rights to the railway was David Waldron, who bought the rights to the Chutes Park. Here's something that is telling of all of this railway stuff. Waldron also has his name on the 1873 ordinance to open a franchise that would allow 2 iron railroad tracks to be laid for passenger cars to be used on. Basically, what I see a lot of from the readings, and it's been mentioned, I'm not discovering this, is that what you do is you buy a plot of land, have an amusement at the end of it, then you set up a railway that leads straight to it.
Yeah.
So you buy the railway that leads to it, not only the thing. There's a lot of times where you kind of read about the conspiracy of transit.
Well, yeah, it's not a conspiracy. You'll hear what people. Yeah, it's just business. It's not a conspiracy. It's true. I killed the Kennedys. It wasn't Satan that shouted it like Mick Jagger says.
Turns out my last name is Grassy Knoll. That's what confused everybody.
First name Warren Report. Is that the right report? Or is that the 9/11 report?
The Warren Report, I think, is... you actually don't know.
So you think that there was a second airplane in 9/11
that shot Robert Kennedy?
It all makes sense.
To Oliver Stone's house. Back to the Spring and West 6th Street Railroad, please. The fare was 10 cents. Horse cars ran on the weekdays between 6:30 a.m. They ran all the way to 10 p.m. Good for them. And passengers could ride from the intersection of Temple and Spring to South 6th Street and then west to Figueroa. That's about a 1.5 mile route. I'll keep my dime, thank you.
You know what I could get for a dime?
A good time. I was very interested in the fact that the barn for the horses and the cars was on 6th and Figueroa. I don't know why. Just because there's a lot of large skyscrapers and hotels there. And to think that there was a barn.
Those were all used to be barns. The horses were on the 90th floor. They had to jump into a glass of water to get down. It was very exciting.
It's a good time back then.
Everything's a good time.
Early 1880s.
There were no horse rights laws yet. Ugh. If only we could go back.
I hope that we don't have any horses listening to this.
Mr. Ed!
So after selling his interest in Spring and 6th Railway, he opened the East LA and San Pedro Railway, switching from a single narrow gauge line to a standard gauge, which you're going to explain.
Yeah.
This happened in 1876. It was benefited, this railway, more for like freight businesses going out to the harbor than like regular passengers. So eventually it would shut down and the tracks were removed in 1880. Next came the Main Street and Agricultural Park Street Railroad, opened in 1875. It was another horse-powered wagon. This was financed primarily by John Downey and Isaiah Hellman, two of the guys who had their hands in the Chutes Park, and another man named William Workman, who was the 18th mayor of LA.
Hellman will come up later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
He plays a big part. And he also plays a part in older episodes. So does Workman. I'll get to it.
Oh, I do remember Workman's name. I know that I read it somewhere.
Temple Workman, ring a bell. The bank that Tiburcio Vasquez robbed. Does that ring a bell for you, Mr. Gonzalez?
This line would bring people from downtown to Agricultural Park, which is near the USC area. Have you heard of Agricultural Park before?
Is that what is now Exposition Park?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you know what it was like then?
Like rich people sauntering around, getting randy with each other?
Getting randy indeed. Agricultural Park offered Angelenos a racetrack, but not just for horses. I mean, you couldn't watch horses race as much because they were running the transport industry. You could see a horse, sure, but don't you want to go see a camel race or a dog race or a bicycle race or auto races?
I'd like to see a camel race a bicycle.
Camel always wins, but through sympathy.
It spits on the bicycle and it slips.
I have respect for him. He stands up for himself. There was a demolition derby. There was animal fights.
Wait, a demolition derby?
Yeah, they had
like
auto
monster
races.
Trucks?
Yeah, monster trucks.
Which in that day was just like a wagon.
Yeah.
With really big wheels. Even bigger than regular.
They didn't have color flames to paint on, so they really just set it on fire.
And they threw cyan powder on it.
You've seen Ben-Hur, right?
Oh, have I?
They had animal fights, apparently really vicious animal fights that eventually were like, yeah, I know.
This will come up in a future episode.
We're going to have a dog fight live in the episode.
the big dog fight extravaganza. LA Meekly presents Crimes Against Humanity.
Are you siding with the Rottweiler or the Bulldog? There was a saloon, and I read in one article, I couldn't find too much about this, and I really want to see a picture. There was a saloon that apparently they boasted that it had the longest bar. I don't even really know what that means, but I kind of got an idea of it going so far I can't see the other end.
Yeah. Or, hey, Johnny, give me a whiskey. And then it's going for like 3 minutes. And by the time it gets to you, it's been drank by everybody else.
It's aged appropriately by the time it gets to you.
It was a 3-year when I got it.
They also had a brothel there.
Oh my God.
And a bunch of other vice-filled amenities. Like you said, in 1913, it was changed to Exposition Park. There's a few others I should mention. The Central Railroad of Los Angeles, which was opened in 1883, departed from the Southern Pacific Depot to a terminal at Washington and Figueroa with 2 standard gauge horse cars. That's about a 3-mile run in about 30 minutes. They operated from 5 cars and had 25 horses that allowed them to run a horsey every 15 minutes. The Main and 5th Railroad, which opened up in 1887 and ran from 1st and Main to 5th and Central. Around this time, technology was advancing, but what wasn't progressing was a livelihood of the main power source of these rail lines, which was horses. Horses are great, but Los Angeles is a very hilly city in many areas.
Yeah.
San Francisco, our northern rival for the snobbiest city in California, knows this problem all too well. They were using horse-powered trolleys to get people around too, but horses were having an understandable problem hauling a public transit car full of people up a hill. Apparently, it was really common to find a dead horse by the road because they just couldn't handle pulling people, especially uphill. So they would just die on the side of the road, and they would be connected to a box full of people.
Just waiting. Maybe it'll start up again.
Oh, he's down for a nap.
Why does it smell like glue already?
What makes me sad is I have like 3 glue jokes in here. So it was only rational that someone would come along and create a better technology. And it was up to Andrew Smith Halliday to create the cable car up in San Francisco. I don't know if he was a horse rights activist, but I do know he was a successful wire rope manufacturer. He developed a system of pulling streetcars along using a cable and pulleys from underneath the street, where the chuds live. He did this in 1873. Horse-drawn streetcars remained the primary mode of public transport through the 1880s, but eventually technological advances soon sent the horses to the glue factory, and the tour doesn't end well for them. The last horse-drawn car service was abandoned in 1897, so they went until 1897 with that. So then we're going to switch over to talking about cable cars now. There are 5 cable car railways opened up at this point that traveled through Bunker Hill. First, we have the 2nd Street Cable Railway, which opened in 1885. We got our first...
Second, we had the 1st Street Railway,
which ran from Spring Street to what is now Belmont Avenue. The 2nd Street Cable Railway used 3 dummy grips and 3 trailers, each which sat about a dozen riders. I'm going to start using acronyms. The SSCR provided riders... What's that even mean? Is that a Nazi thing? I don't even know.
You always insert your agenda into this.
The listeners have to know. The SSCR provides riders a 12 to 14 minute one-way trip through the steep areas of Bunker Hill and Hope Street, and ran from 6 a.m. to about 11 p.m. It was a very popular line, and some say it sparked interest in the development of the land west of Bunker Hill. Investors originally expected the line to serve around 600 people a day, but by the end of 1886, the cable cars were carrying about 3 times that number. It's very popular. And it's very heavy, very slow.
Grab on.
Just drag along. The company left while sales were good and sold to a guy named John McLaughlin, and he was now the primary owner of SSCR. He wanted to connect this newly purchased rail from downtown to the area we now know as Hollywood, but there was a lot of problems with the Cahuenga Valley Railroad, and after a lot of attempts at it, he couldn't accomplish it. So by 1889, he went bankrupt almost trying to do this. And it didn't help that a year later, the rainfall of the 1880s damaged the sections of the line, so about 1890, he had to close that down. Another one after that was the Temple Street Cable Railway, which opened up in 1886. It rode along Temple Street between Spring and Belmont again. It was another short line, but it got people to build and develop Angelino Heights. That was developed because of this line.
So blame them.
This was a success since the financial backer of the Temple Street Cable Railway was Prudent Beaudry, the man who developed Bunker Hill.
Temple Beaudry.
Beaudry Street is named after him. The TSCR was the most successful cable car in Los Angeles at the time. That was the one that everyone kind of wanted to ride. Next came the LA Cable Railway in 1887. This one merged the horse-powered City Central and the East and West LA Street railways. It eventually became a cable car service in the summer of 1889. The LA Cable Railway became the largest transit venture in the city and operated from Boyle Heights and East LA out to Westlake Park and Grand Avenue. In late 1889, the company reorganized and became Pacific Railway Co. Its president was a gentleman named C.F. Crank. Keep that in mind.
Mr. Crank.
Mr. Crank. The company was sold under foreclosure in 1898 and acquired by Henry E. Huntington, who you will be talking about, I believe.
In depth.
He did this in 1902 and incorporated the line into the Pacific Electric Railway.
Spoiler alert.
So there was 3 more similar enough railways that need to be mentioned. Of the 3, only one is still somewhat operational. We'll now discuss the funicular railways. These are a special kind of railway that had one destination and was moved...
Hell. And you can only buy a one-way ticket.
There's a one stop at Purgatory on the way.
On the house.
Which
is Satan's house.
These funicular lines ran on really steep slopes. How they ran was they had cables attached to a pulley system which raised or lowered the cars along the slope. The 2 cars are paired at opposite ends and they acted as counterweight. Thank you for stepping on my feet. Because there was no
counterweight.
Because there was no traction with the wheels, these funicular lines could climb these steep slopes. There's 5 in Southern California, but I'm only going to address 3. The other 2, there's one at Catalina. There's another one at Mount Washington.
Catalina Island?
Yeah, Catalina Island has one.
Where the Buffalo Road?
You want to book a trip right now to Catalina? There's one in Mount Washington. I'll be talking briefly about the 3, but you're going to talk about 1. So I'm only going to really mention 2. So there are 2 in downtown, these funicular lines that should be mentioned. The first one is very famous. The most popular of these funicular rails was Angel's Flight. Are you familiar with Angel's Flight?
Very familiar.
Very popular tourist attraction in our fair city. It was set up in 1901 to help folk climb the 300-foot ascent of Bunker Hill. Connected passengers from Hill to Olive, which is really steep actually if you try to walk it before. The rail cars ran...
I try to walk up the path of the Angel's Flight. I've caused a lot of accidents. It's been shut down so many times because of me.
It looks like a ladder on its side. What do you want me to do?
Again, pleased to meet you. I hope you've guessed my name. There's a lot of Satan talk in this episode.
It's good because we're going to sacrifice a horse.
Of course.
The rail cars run alongside Angel's Knoll, which is a park that's a patch of grass that's on top
Joseph Gordon-Levitt's favorite place to hang out?
It was made famous from 500 Days of Summer.
Yeah, it was made famous by 500 Days of Summer.
People were talking about it like they'd never seen it before. I couldn't believe it. And they called it the 500 Days of Summer Park.
You know, if you look on Google Maps, it says like Angel's Flight, 500 Days of Summerhill.
Oh my god. Everyone suddenly thought LA was relevant after that.
Little did they know.
It was designed and built, sorry, not Angels, no. Angels Flight was designed and built by a guy named Colonel W.J. Eddy, who was a lawyer, an engineer, and a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln.
What?
Yeah.
A personal friend of Abraham Lincoln.
Personal friend. Hey, Abe, shake my hand.
Abe, how you doing? You still got a wedgie? Huh?
Yo, Linky, how's that wife of yours doing?
I would know.
He was born in New York in 1832 and ended up through his travels in Los Angeles in 1895. He has
Took him a long time to get here.
Yeah, well, he was hanging out with Abraham Lincoln, stopping off in the Civil War. He worked for
a quick stop.
3 years in between this time before he got to LA. He worked as a railroad engineer in Arizona. Gave him a little skill set.
What's his name again?
Colonel J.W. Eddy.
There's another guy coming up who also did rail stuff in Arizona, but his name is not Colonel J.W. Eddy.
Is Griffith?
Colonel Griffith J. Eddy.
The two Angels Flight passenger cars have names Oliviet and Sinai.
What?
Oliviet and Sinai, named
Cyanide?
Sinai, like biblical mountains.
Oh, Sinai.
Sinai. Is it Sinai?
Like cedar cyanide.
I thought it was Sinai.
Sinai. Cedar
Is it
Sinai.
Sinai?
Sinai.
Sinai. Like your name was Sinai.
Yeah, and I'm sighing. Sigh. What's wrong? Nice.
Sinai and Oliviet.
Well, I don't know. I have no idea what to compare Oliviet to.
Oliviet. You want to look up biblical mountains right now?
Olivet, yeah. That's like a quick tour of the biblical mountain range.
In its glory days, Angel Flight cost 1 cent, which was good because it only lasted a minute. That's almost too expensive for that minute. It was a functional railway for many years, even as cars took over the road and Bunker Hill was destroyed. It was still operational. Yeah. But people kept riding Angel Flight because it was just like a quaint tourist attraction. It was really popular. It's still, even if people don't ride it, it's still a popular tourist attraction.
Yeah, I did it before it closed for like the 80th time.
Yeah.
I did it.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did it feel like you're riding Splash Mountain backwards?
It was. I was twice as wet.
And there's pictures that prove it.
That's why they closed. Little boy pees himself all over.
The first time it was closed was in 1969. It was done for a urban renewal project. It was closed for a really long time, almost like 20 years. And it reopened in the early 90s. It was refurbished and relocated a half block south, reopening adjacent to California Plaza, which 1996. It ran for a good 5 years before trouble bought a fare. In 2001, Sinai, the passenger car, broke loose. Or what actually happened was the cable unreeled from the drum that it was wrapped around, and the car was just let free, and gravity did the rest.
God.
It rolled down the inclined tracks and crashed into Oliviet, its brother.
Oh no.
Which had been brought to a halt by the inclined railway's braking system, I guess.
Sibling violence.
They said the real issue with this was the brake systems had no fail-safe setup. The cars had no backup brakes. They were just age-old design flaws with funicular rails that had never been updated, and they're just just keep going. Even though it was refurbished.
What's going to happen? The cables will snap?
What's going to happen? Gravity plus weight?
Equals comedy.
As a result of this accident, an 83-year-old passenger was killed, and his wife and 6 others were injured. All of this occurred in front of a crowd of onlookers, by the way. It's probably photos of this happening.
Yeah. And if you look real close, you might see me in the background, tipping my black hat.
A pair of scissors in my hand.
With my finger pressed to my lips. Don't tell a soul, or else I'll have yours. I'm Satan.
I get it. The fallen angel. You heard of me?
You might know me as Lucifer.
My good friend Mick Jagger might have spun a yarn every once in a while. A musical yarn. Angel's Flight was inactive for some time and it reopened about 9 years later in 2010. A year later, in 2011, it was shut down again for having a worn wheel. Reopened soon after that, but in September of 2013, yet another accident occurred on Angel's Flight and several passengers were injured this time. Since then, it's been inactive.
I wrote it in between the wheel problem and the multiple death problem. That's when I was on there.
It's the same thing with Big Thunder Mountain. Oh no. So you're not taking passengers?
Is the wait going to be shorter?
It's like gambling. If someone hits big, it's the farthest time away from another time someone's going to hit big.
Yeah. Tragedy won't strike twice. Maybe 4 times, but not twice.
No, not twice, no. A lot of people, since these tragedies, are trying to push forward and get Angel's Flight operational again, and one of these people is Mayor Garcetti. One of the things that's holding everyone back, though, is trying to find a safe way to continue using the funicular method of movement to operate Oliviet and Sinai. Last year, there was a big push for it to get done, but as of August 2015, when we're recording today, nothing's really done yet. They're still trying to figure that out. They're still trying to get enough momentum behind it.
Oh, that's funny.
If you miss Angel's Flight Railway, just follow them on Twitter and get tweets from Oliviet and Sinai because it comes from their perspective.
Sinai says sorry.
Let me read you some tweets.
Oh no.
Sinai says, "Wow, even Los Angeles Times talks about our plight." Sinai says,
Bill Cosby has a plight.
Oh my God.
You're the perpetrator, Sinai.
You try to break loose, see what happens? People get hurt. Sinai says, is help on the way, Oliviate? ?
Oh, no.
Oliviate observes, be flattered, Sinai. In just a day, 715 plus of our fans signed the change.org letter to Mayor Garcetti.
Missing were the 3 people who died.
This whole thing, like when I was reading it,
it's a little weird.
I was a little weirded out, but I thought this is something we should and would do.
Yeah. I did write that. It is fun. I wish it was open again. But the reason you're bringing it up is because it was owned by Los Angeles Railway, right?
Yeah.
One of their endeavors.
It was hilarious. So was the next one I'm going to be talking about. Court Flight. Do you know about Court Flight?
No.
I never heard of it before I did research, but it's kind of amazing. In 1905.
I'll be the judge of that.
In 1905.
That is amazing.
See? I knew you'd like that. They opened up another railway known as Court Flight, where you fight and flight. Court Flight took people up to what was once known as Court Hill, which is apparently no longer there, but it's where the courthouse and the Hall of Administration is, a long temple between Broadway and Grand. It seems like it was connected from the readings I'm seeing from like Broadway to First and also Hill to First, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense because they don't run parallel, so I don't really know like a route, but if it's a flight, it's just one way up, so I'm going to say Broadway to Grand. It was promoted as the shortest railway in the world that climbed 200 feet at a grade of 43 degrees, which is steeper than Angel's Flight. To go up the rail cost you 5 cents. Going downhill was free.
That is steep.
It is. Going downhill was free because you can't charge for gravity. It helped local Bunker Hill residents and courthouse workers get their business done. That's the thing about both these Angel's Flight and Courthouse Flights, that they were really for the people, the residents and tourists. Like they really did. Like you can laugh at it, but they really did get people up the hill. Court Flight lasted until 1943, which is amazing because for something that is almost identical to Angel's Flight and was around for 30 something years, I've never heard about it before, like doing research for this. The decline was mostly due to the lack of engineers and conductors during World War II who were off fighting the Nazis. Another important factor in closing
one funicular at a time.
Another important factor in its closing was a fire in the October of 1943. Fire purifies all. It damaged the wood ties so severely that it would require a complete reconstruction, and they weren't up for it or didn't have the money. So that was it for Court's Flight, and eventually that was it for Court Hill too. There are pictures of like where they removed the tracks and it was just like a dirt hill, and now they put important buildings. Dirt Hill. So those were the first Larrys before they were Larrys. Actually,
so that was before the Los Angeles
Railroad. They were acquired later.
Oh, okay.
But they were all right. Pre-Larry railways.
Larry is short for Los Angeles Railway, by the way.
There was an early attempt in 1885 of creating an electric streetcar from the area along Pico Boulevard west of Vermont. Vermont.
That's how the locals pronounce it in Vermont.
Colonel Charles H. Howland obtained a franchise to build
Another colonel?
Another colonel. They were just handing that title out. You got $40.
Or you just take it, yeah.
You got $40, I'll make you a colonel. This colonel obtained a franchise to build a streetcar line that was either going to be cable or electric powered. It wasn't decided at the time. This was known as the Los Angeles Electric Railway Company. The Railway.
Colonel Eddie wants a railway.
It used a 2-trolley system that got electricity from overhead wires. Over the years of operation, the railway was bogged down by electrical issues and technical problems, and after a powerhouse boiler explosion in 1888, they cut the electrical car service and resumed horse-pulled cars until the company went bankrupt because you can't rely on horses. This is showing a change.
Lazy horses.
They just need to get a real job that you apply for.
Like Seabiscuit. Now that's a horse I can have a poster up on my wall of.
Why couldn't you get hired like Seabiscuit did? This is showing to me of a change in tide, because by 1896, many of the major horse and cable cars were converting to electrical power, and here's one going backwards and not surviving because of it. So really, electric trolleys just need to have the kinks fixed, but there was like a future in it. Another charter known as the LA Consolidated Electric Railway, I'm going to call it LACER.
If you can't already tell, there's so many complicated railway names. Most of them you don't really need to know. No. There's a few. Larry, which is Los Angeles Railway, and Pacific Electric and Southern Pacific, and a few other like Los Angeles Pacific. Those are the ones really pay attention to. But
Larry and PE. That's it. LACER is another one. I'm going to repeat what it stands for. LA Consolidated Electric Railway. Jesus. I'm a baby.
LACER.
This opened up in 1890 by two gentlemen, Moses Sherman, who was a real estate magnate. I'm sure you'll talk about him. And Eli Clark. It too used an improved overhead trolley system. It had an overhead line that had an electrical current and a spring-loaded trolley pole with a wheel travel along it, and it used it to collect electricity as it moved along. I've seen it in my head 1,000 times, but now knowing how to operate something, of course that's what it does.
It all makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't find out too much about the routes or territories, mostly business and operations, but it should be noted that they are key in the Los Angeles Railway history, because Sherman was competing with James Crank of the Pacific Railway. Crank at it again for areas to build rails on. A year later, the LACER added a second electric streetcar that ran land around the USC Agricultural Park area. And the same year, they purchased the rights to the LA Electric Railway Company. By the end of 1891, they had 25 miles of electric lines and 5 routes.
Sherman and Clark, big part of this story.
They seem to be the first ones to be like, if we buy more rails and connect them, we can...
Let's make this cohesive, maybe.
Exactly. 2 years later, in October of 1893, they acquired the Pacific Railway at a foreclosure sale. With that purchase, they got 20 miles of cable railway and 2 more routes, as well as 9 miles of horse rails and 3 routes to go with that.
How many horses did they get?
All of them in California. They owned all of them. In the wild horses.
Which was 4.
They were being exported.
For the war effort.
They were getting turned into bullets. They made many plans to convert and operate under electricity. For a long time, though, they kept the cable and horse railways in use, which was pretty cool until, of course, that was passe.
There's no in-between, like, well, we're on horsepower now. What's the next step?
Yeah.
Electricity, of course.
You want me to electrocute the horse? No, please. Then it kind of gets sketchy after this point. I'm sure, like, your information will clarify some of this.
Yeah, there's a lot of holes. Take one hand and take another one. Interlock your fingers.
Interlock.
And there's the steeple. There you got it.
But where's the people?
On the horse-drawn carriage. Too many of them.
I couldn't follow how Lacer traded hands, but in 1891, the gentlemen of Lacer, Sherman and Clark, sold their land to M.E. Hammond, who was a treasurer alongside Sherman and Clark.
Again, this is a very complicated episode, so listen to it many times.
I can't tell if they were moving land to a treasurer, if that's something businesses do, or if he acquired it, which makes no sense since Lacer seemed to be doing well. They didn't need to be selling to anybody, especially their own treasurer. I do know that Sherman had to eventually sell the rights to Pacific Railway, though. What seems to happen is that many of the lines get sold to these monopolizing schemers, and Lacer and the main...
It's so hard to run a railway company. Trust me.
It's hard work to be a tycoon, you know?
Everyone was just merging to like, we're going to die if we don't sell out to this person. So they were just all merging with whoever they could to stay afloat. They don't want to go the way of the pulley horse.
Yeah, exactly. No. They don't want to go the way of court flight, you know. Oh, one stop, get out of town. Who are you? You smell bad. So I went off the rails, if you were.
We did that joke already.
Oh, was I here for that?
No.
I was playing a kid, that's right.
There was some little boy here earlier. You were in here.
So Lacer and the Main Street and Agricultural Park Street Railroad, if you remember that, merged with another early competitor called the LA Traction Company, which had green cars running between Boyle Heights to MacArthur Park. These 3 companies formed the LA Railway in 1895, which is sold to Henry Huntington in 1898. Now, Huntington had ownership and moved forward with the vast and officially named Los Angeles Railway, or LARy as I'm going to be calling it.
Little Y. LAR, little Y.
So here we are. Larry, finally, after all this evolution, we ended up with Larry. The Los Angeles Railway is known under 2 common names. One of them is Larry, which we've been joking about. The other one, the cars that were known as yellow cars because they had a yellow paint scheme. It was either yellow and brown or yellow and green. I prefer the yellow and green ones. They just look neat.
I'm a yellow-brown boy.
Really? It's a hot dog thing, isn't it?
I like mustard with molasses on my hot dogs.
So they were either yellow and brown, yellow and green, except for one Christmas in the 40s, they painted to look like candy canes.
Oh.
Isn't that neat?
That is fun, but wait a minute. They repainted the whole thing and then like, it's Boxing Day. Let's back to the yellow and brown and green.
Listen, they do that with buses now where they put the full ads.
I've seen a bus made out of Minions. Those are yellow cars.
Like
Beady boop boop.
Minions.
We've got the Minion constituency.
We're paid by the Minion company to say that, by the way. They've gotten everywhere.
We're millionaires now.
This should be noted that in the very technical readings available for the rail system in LA, there's one big distinction between the yellow cars and the red cars. That is this: track gauge. Red cars, they use standard gauge.
Yeah.
Yellow cars, now they use a little less common 42-inch narrow gauge.
Yeah.
Look at that. You know, we don't need as much on the yellow car side. Sorry. Sly.
Who lasted longer?
In 1910, Huntington made a move for the complete ownership of Larry by selling his interest in the Pacific Electric to A.H. Harriman, who I'm sure you're going to talk about, who was the president of Southern Pacific.
Oh, yeah.
Harriman owned what remained of the LA Traction Co. and the California Pacific Interurban Line since 1903. Routes were being divided. You're going to get more into that. What eventually happens, though, everything is divided between roughly local and interurban, and LA Railway was given only to operate within the city. Yellow cars connected points within about 6 miles north-southeast
downtown LA, you mean?
Of downtown LA, yeah. 6 miles around within downtown LA.
Or
this might get you're joking.
Nothing.
This might seem like they got the bad end of the stick, but the yellow cars were unknowingly assigned with being the working man transport. They got everyone from work and home. They also carried around shoppers and sightseers. It was like just we're going to take a railway to downtown.
But they smelled, so.
You don't
Red car! Choo-choo!
It's the difference between Lyft and Uber.
Yeah, and I think we know who's who.
True.
I'm a taxi cab.
I'm not sure at what point Angel Flight and Court Flight were acquired by Larry, but they were acquired within this same time.
Yeah.
The most commuted on lines, Line P, which ran from West Pico to East 1st Street, I believe in Boyle Heights, and East LA to downtown. They carried thousands of commuters a week. Line J ran from Jefferson to Walnut Park and Southgate, I read, which was kind of off the beaten path of what I understood Larry did, but then I imagine that as they were expanding and eventually became, Larry, what are you doing? You're killing me, Larry. Line U started at Central Avenue and moved to South Vermont near USC.
So they were all named after letters?
Letters and numbers, yeah.
Okay.
I have a list of them. I just read the ones that were most commuted on.
New York.
I don't get it.
You wouldn't.
These three, along with some other local routes, would see from 35 to 75,000 people per week, which seems kind of excessive, but remember, there were no cars at the time. Or cars weren't popular at the time. Yeah. So this was how people got around who couldn't afford cars, and cars were just like, that's like saying you own a jet.
Which I do.
I own a hot air balloon. They service a much smaller area than the red cars that would follow, but they serve twice as many commuters.
Yeah.
In 1924, which is apparently their peak year.
Same with Pacific Electric, actually, I think.
You're lying.
The gloves are off.
Oh boy, here it comes. 1924, peak year for yellow cars. They carried 255 million passengers across 642 miles of track that they own.
255 million? But that's like one person takes like 2 rides a day, right?
Maybe, yeah.
It can't be. There's not even that many people in the world in 1924.
You know what it probably meant? 255 million rides, which is passengers. I'm going to follow him home, find out where he's going tomorrow, and now it no longer counts.
Yeah.
Because he takes it every day, no longer counts.
No, he doesn't.
Okay, then you know what? You know how people they serve 6? The one you want to hear?
That's how Larry treats people.
Well, let's not romanticize this public transport thing, okay?
Public transportation's gross. We all know it.
Filthy. As early as the 1910s, Larry yellow cars were notorious for being overcrowded, or as the 1977 publication The Yellow Cars of Los Angeles puts it, jammed from stern to stern with animated, happy throngs of people. Nah, they got the first part right, maybe. Jammed from stern to stern.
Certainly was a throng.
There are photos that exist of people hanging on every inch of the yellow car, and I mean like the exterior, which means inside of it, like on the seats must have been.
Can I sit in the wheelhouse?
Can I lay across your laps, please? The seats were made of hardwood, which was not pleasant. Open window air conditioning during summertime was not
open
ideal.
Window air conditioning. That's just an open window.
Yeah, you didn't get that. And there were often delays that
bordered me for a fool. Larry.
And there were often delays Sorry. There were often delays that bordered on the why do I even bother leaving the house that were there so late. It didn't help that Huntington was paying transit workers as little as possible. That was his policy, causing them to go on strike several times and eventually unionize, which he hated.
Yeah. Hey, he was a great man.
The founding men of Los Angeles, kind of assholey. Yeah. We should do an episode where we just trash. We just do a roast.
And over here, what do we got? Griffith J. Griffith? More like Griffith Gay. Oops. I've said too much.
You don't think it was coincidence that he shot his wife? He was a well-known hater of the union and would hire scabs to work as well as hire strike breakers to infiltrate the union and undo their work.
There was something in like 1919 where they were like, all of his workers were like, well, we're going to unionize if you don't pay us what we want. All right. And then he just hired a whole new crew.
Oh my God.
That was it. That was the end of the protest.
There was another strike where the strikers were hiding, like they were stealing rail cars and hiding them in barns and stuff. What? I didn't read too much about it, but I thought you were going to take over.
No.
We should, bonus episode. Because of all these strikers, though, there were less yellow cars on the road, meaning overcrowding when a car eventually did show up. The striking.
It's here.
It's only got 69 people on it.
I haven't been at work in 3 months.
That's okay. My boss is waiting too. But the lines were expanded out in correlation to the expansion of the city. Sprawl led to rails being built, and this had a lot to do with the fact that many of the men promoting and purchasing rails were landowners.
Spoiler alert.
Much of this expansion was happening between 1917 and 1931. This was what the yellow car was doing. The routes were expanding as it was getting harder and harder to be on a yellow car. During the 30s, Larry was able to continue to expand and began to get this profit, which was unusual for many of the railways of Los Angeles, in particular Line P and Line U, which I mentioned before.
PU.
Oh boy, I should have said that the other way. Were very profitable for the company.
UP.
The eventual undoing of Larry could be connected to many factors.
That's the name of my autobiography. The eventual undoing of Larry, or how I got away with murdering Larry King.
The undoing had several different factors. Old and weathered rail equipment and the infrastructure as a whole. No one was really updating or maintaining it, as well well as they should have because there was money and they weren't profiting. So the money wasn't coming in to fix all this stuff. There were frequent delays, and this happening in a time of like automobiles.
Go, go, go.
Go, go, go. Everyone has their own private little bedroom. They're driving around in it. There were a lot of fatal accidents that were happening. Many commenters mentioned that the yellow cars operated at a loss of revenue for their entire history of operation. In 1945, the Huntington estate sells their assets of Larry to the LA Transit lines, which would later be bought and merged into what is now the LA Metropolitan Transit Authority. There is some controversy because LATL, the LA Transit Lines, I'll repeat one more time, was a subsidiary of National City Lines, who was financed by several automobile and petroleum companies, in particular General Motors, Phillips Petroleum, Mack Truck, Standard Oil of California, and Goodyear, all aimed towards putting cars on the road.
Yeah, but that's not really...
A lot of people want to say that this is a conspiracy theory.
It's a conspiracy theory. It is.
It is. Yeah, because you want to think that there's something nefarious behind it, but it's really just
you know what?
It's technology.
Yeah, it's so... This whole story is so complicated. You want something like, well, it was this guy's fault, of course.
Yeah.
No.
The way the city had been laid out by the time all these transit lines were established begged to be driven on by a car. There was freeways now connecting everything. You could almost look at like the railways being mirrored by the freeways that were being built.
I've got metaphors too.
That was in charge.
You were supposed to do similes.
What I meant was that it was like that. So because it was costly to replace the antique equipment and power generating systems, motor buses, being the more affordable alternative, decided to send the yellow car Larrys to the glue factory.
They extracted all the yellow.
In 1963, the remaining routes became the modern bus system, the modern, what was the RTD and now the MTA. And after a 27-year absence of no rail system, the light rail returned to LA with the opening of the Metro Blue Line in 1990 that connected downtown to Long Beach.
Yeah.
Very far. It might be the farthest one, I think. The one that has the farthest reach, I think.
Not true.
Which one has the farthest reach?
You'll find out.
Oh, no, don't blow my mind. I didn't sign up for this.